And oh, we're live. Oh, gee whiz, it just like jumped up on me that time. Music counts down. Okay, everybody. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about leaving food to finish cooking on Shabbos. If you'll notice from the syllabus, we began talking more specifically about 2 weeks ago. We talked about what cooking is, what baking is. We talked a lot around what all the cooking is about. So what we really want to talk about today is how to keep food warm and reheating foods for Shabbos. This is like probably the most complicated law of Shabbos to learn about because there's a lot of intricacies to it, but once you kind of get the hang of it, it really becomes easy. It's kind of just like you get into a groove, and it kind of just sort of rolls through from there. We're going to talk about why there were these enactments to begin with, because it's not. We talked about it specifically last time. The actual Torah that goes into it, and this time we're going to talk about the rabbinic issues that go into this. The rabbinic enactments. So we're going to start with in section 3 over here in the syllabus. We used the same syllabus used for the last class. This was the section 3 of that syllabus. We're talking about the rabbinic enactment to prevent cooking and stoking coals. So we talked about last time specifically was what cooking actually entailed. So we talked about different levels and how far along it is for it to be cooked. And so the rabbis basically looked at those different degrees of being cooked, meaning raw. Talk about ma'achal ben drusai, where it's 1/3 to 1/2 cooked, fully cooked where it improves as you cook it more. And so with those different levels, the rabbis basically took a look at the conditions around them and made a decision that that going ahead and leaving food on open embers was a problem. And the problem was not so much that you were going to put food on the fire on Shabbos, but that the food wasn't going to cook all the way, and you might actually stoke the coals. Now, that's important to know that most of this rabbinic enactment revolves around coals, because when we start talking about our own appliances, that's going to have, as technology changed, the applications of this ancient law changed. So the original problem was that people had only 3 types of ways of cooking. It was directly into the coals, so you basically make a fire pit, take your pot of food, put it into some coals, and would just cook. All right, and that was the basic way that you'd basically leave it directly on the fire, or you would have a little tripod where you'd hold it over the top of the coals to cook. And then there was a little bit more of it. That was sort of a a very basic camp-style cooking apparatus that they had in ancient times. Then there were 3 apparatus that were called the kofach, the kira, and the tanur. The kofach was basically a cylinder that had enough room to put 1 pot into the top of it. So imagine an earthenware or bricked up cylinder, and you could put a pot in there, and the pot would hold at the edges. And on the very bottom of it, there was a little bit of airspace. You would insert coals, light them, and the heat would go straight up. It was fairly well insulated. There's very little air in there. The heat was fairly intense. The second one is called a kira. Kira had a place to put 2 pots in it. It was wider, more air got in, and therefore didn't stay as intensely warm. And the third one was the tanur, which was an oven. The oven was very small, very narrow opening. Its heat was intense, and actually it was so intense you could actually cook on the outside of it. If anybody has ever seen the process of making laffa, where basically laffa is like about a 12-inch pizza dough shaped thing. They roll it out, they put on this big giant mitt that looks like an upside-down mushroom. They slap it up against the side of the wall, and it bakes right there on the outside. Here they make it on the inside of something like that, but imagine if the oven itself, the inside, the heat was so intense the outside got hot, they used to bake on the outside of it. So the heat on that was more intense. Just know that for these 3 different things, that for the most part, since the heat was so intense, the rabbis basically required you to remove coals, which was called garuch, which was there's 2 things you had to do before Shabbos where you could use these apparatus on Shabbos. You had to do garuch, you had to scrape the coals out and just use the residual heat inside of it, or katum, which was to throw ash on top of it. We'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about barbecuing, because that's the only time we actually use coals. So that was fine for a long time until the procedure using stoves changed into basically modern apparatus. Even about as much as 700, 800 years ago, the stove itself changed, where it was wood burn, and some of it was steam. Some of the heat was steam powered. Especially nowadays, where everything is either gas or electric. The way in which these things developed and the way that they transferred heat changed the application of the law. I'll have to bore everybody on this. You are welcome to study the anthropology development of this law. We will not touch on that. Just know that there was an ancient practice and it has application to today. Basically, the most strict law, the most intense fire, the tanur, that law, where you couldn't, basically almost impossible to use that in ancient laws on Shabbos, no longer really apply today, because our ovens are much larger, they're not as intense, they store the heat only inside, and so everything basically, as far as we're concerned, is like a kira, the sort of the middle of the road rabbinic enactment, where it was possible to basically, by either scraping out the coals or covering them, we can go ahead and use that apparatus on Shabbos. Okay, and so with that, we're going to move into section B2 over here, talking about leaving the pot to finish cooking, Shehiyah. We're talking about Shehiyah with the stove, the oven, and the crock pot. Okay, so with the stove, we're referring to, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, just jump out or go ahead and put the question on the side over here in the group chat, and I will address them. Or if anybody sitting here wants to jump in, just go ahead and jump in. So with the stove, it says you're able to finish cooking after Shabbos starts, and we talked a little bit about this last week also. If you want to refer further up in section 1, we talked a little bit about in numbers 2, 3, and in 2 and 3. Of 1A2 and 1A3, different levels of cooked, and so in those cases, you can use a stove top to finish cooking after Shabbos starts. So if the food is so basically the custom is to have the food fully cooked going into Shabbos. In order to basically obviate the need to require you to cover the fire. And we'll talk about covering the fire in just a moment. With either what we talk about scraping out the coals or covering them with ash. The best way to do it is to have it fully cooked, which basically means, like we talked about last week, having it so cooked that the chicken, the meat is fully cooked, the vegetables fully cooked. If there's bones, the bones have gotten soft. That's fully cooked in terms of soups, and that would be the best way to go ahead and do it. If your time doesn't allow for it, then you could go ahead and rely on one of two other options. One is to have it cooked only ma'achal ben drusai, which we said that let's say your soup will take you 3 hours to cook, and you cooked it for an hour. Preferably an hour and a half if possible, so it's either 1/3 of the way or 1/2 of the way cooked, where it would be edible, just not very good. Then that would suffice to leave it on the fire, allow it to continue cooking, because the original enactment, when you left it on top of coals, is you wouldn't bother the food, you wouldn't stir it, and you wouldn't stoke the coals to hasten the cooking process. Nonetheless, nowadays, even if you are in a circumstance where you can't cook it all the way, we still basically set up the stove to allow you to finish cooking after Shabbos starts without having to worry about the cooking being finished. But it's important if you want to use an oven. So, for example, you could put a blech down. The blech, we'll talk about that in a second. The blech basically fulfills those two obligations that we talked about before to keep you from adjusting the fire. And the stove, well, if you put on the stove, it'll allow you to, if you put the blech on the stove, allow you to finish cooking something that has basically started cooking 1/3 or 1/2 of the way, and you can finish it so that's ready for the night meal. And the other one that we talked about last week a little bit as well is that food completely raw also wouldn't need a blech. And with that, you wouldn't have to worry about it. You can just put that right before Shabbos, or if you don't want to have to worry about a blech, you can take a fully cooked food, throw raw meat into it, and allow it to cook all the way through the evening or into the next day without having to worry about the blech. That would be the best way to set those up. Let's move on to section 2.2 over here about ovens. So our ovens are basically the same as a stove, not the same as the ancient ovens, which were super intense. The way that we basically work is the following way. Let's say you have a stove with a blech. You can leave your food heating up on top of that fire all the way into Shabbos, no problem. Whether it's fully cooked or only cooked 1/2 or 1/3 of the way, you can leave it on top of the fire, on top of the blech, going into Shabbos. Okay, and in an oven would basically be the same as a stove, but just without a blech. Okay. So that means a couple of things. Number one, you can't do Chazarah, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, can't put food back on into it after Shabbos has started, or and so on and so forth. The other thing that an oven is basically is that, so if you had food that was 1/3 or at least 1/2 cooked, you could leave it in your oven, allow it to cook either into the night or into the next day, as long as 1/2, 1/3 cooked, because you can treat it like a stove that is neither garuf nor katum, neither have been scraped out or covered. Again, going back to the original rabbinic enactment that the rabbis enacted, if we're going to treat the oven like the most lenient level of cooking devices, cooking apparatus, we're treating an oven like you don't need a blech, or like you can't get a blech in there, and therefore it has to be 1/3 or 1/2 cooked to leave it cooking all the way into the rest of Shabbos. If it's somewhere between, it's not raw, but it's not really half cooked, it's not really edible, you can't leave it in the oven to continue cooking, which means that, well, how would you have food ready in the oven for Friday night? It'd be better to actually wait and put it in raw and let it cook through the night or into the next day than it would be to put it in there somewhere in between. Why? Because that was the way the rabbis set up the enactment. That basically the enactment was that totally raw, no one touches the coals, no one stirs the pot. In between 1/2 and 1/3, you might stir, you might stove. Anything beyond that, that's where it gets a little iffy. Best to not do that, but the Ashkenazim are lenient to allow it to be without a blech for 1/2 or 1/3. Sfardim would not, in many situations, allow that, but Ashkenazim would. Always take the Ashkenazi way; it's much more lenient. Well, don't always, have to Sfardim. But if it's fully cooked, you can leave it in the oven as well, because then again, you don't need a blech. So you're going to ask the obvious question: why can't I just put a blech in the oven? So basically, let's see. Oh yeah, that's a good question. Someone asked a question. You have the problem of opening the oven and then makes the heat back up. I'll address that in a second. I'm going to address that now. I'll address that now after this next thing I'm going to say. You're going to ask, why can't I just put a blech in the oven? So again, the blech is the most simplistic way to use the stove on Shabbos to keep you from adjusting the fire and from stirring your pot, is to take a plain sheet metal and put it into on top of your fire. So Rav Moshe Feinstein basically said, well, yeah, technically speaking, you could do the same thing with the oven. He was the first one to really come up with some solutions for modern ovens back in the 1940s and 50s, and became more prevalent to have quote-unquote modern ovens in the houses. People actually had gas going into their homes. If we can imagine, it's only been about 80 years since we've had indoor plumbing and indoor lots of stuff. Yeah, and like air conditioning, amazingly, is not that old either. Don't buy in a home older than 50 years old. You may not have AC in it, or at least you won't have central air conditioning. So So with that approach, he basically said, okay, listen. So clearly, the ovens that we have nowadays are much larger and not as intense as they were in ancient times because the coals that were in there got these ovens so hot. Even the outside got hot. Well, the outside of our ovens don't get hot. It doesn't have. It's not the same apparatus that the rabbis are talking about in Talmud. But um, the problem is that in order for you to quote unquote cover the fire to meet the conditions of the rabbinic enactment, you have to basically put an oven insert inside of the oven because the fire comes at you from here and from there and from lots of different places. And so therefore, you'd have to create an insert for the oven to do that. And I know people who have done that, but for the average person, it's super impractical to try to do that. I don't even know if you can buy an oven insert any kind. I don't even know what you would do with it other than use it for Shabbos like a blech. But that is one way to create a blech on the oven. But the truth is that it's only going to be in a situation where the food. It's only going to be useful in a situation where the food is in between 1/3 and 1/2, between a little bit more than raw and less than 1/3 or 1/2 cooked, because as someone pointed out, we're gonna have another problem with the oven opening it on Shabbos. Since all modern ovens are operated on a thermostat, every time you open the oven, you automatically change the internal temperature, and then the fire will be turned on through your own activity. So you open it, you close it, you are going to be changing the temperature inside, and you're going to set the fire on through your activity. So the question is, how to even use the oven on Shabbos. Number one, some people might think you might use what's called the Shabbos mode on many ovens. The Shabbos mode is the biggest misnomer. Actually, the Star K, when they came up with it, was a brilliant idea, but they had to do the hugest mea culpa in the whole wide world. When I first took the course with them, like years ago, they basically set it up to create a situation where when you turned on Shabbos mode, it deactivated the LCD monitor, but it didn't create a method to bypass the thermostat. So if you did anything to the oven, you activated the thermostat. So people were led to believe, like, oh, it's on Shabbos mode. I can open and close my door. I can push these buttons that don't respond to me. And the truth is that they didn't create that at all. And it was a big mistake. I've actually explained in greater detail what they actually had done. What they basically did was shut off your monitor so they can't even be used. So, like, for example, we never used here, even though we have Shabbos mode on it, we only use it for Yom Tov as 24-hour bake, but we don't ever really adjust the temperature because you can't figure out if you're turning on the fire, if it's on, it's off, because you can't turn the fire on. Yom Tov, I don't want to get too far off the topic over here. But suffice it to say that there's all types of problems with ovens that even Shabbos mode doesn't fix. It's something everybody's interested in. I can send you what the Star K has put out recently about how to actually use Shabbos mode on their ovens. I think Shabbos mode is basically kind of null and sort of a null point now because you can now set your ovens for continuous bake and use it pretty much the same way. But some people really like the Shabbos mode. So yes, that's so dumb. That sums it up. Anyway, so the proper way to use an oven to use it on Shabbos is in the following way. So in the procedures that I had listed, whereby you obviate the need for a blech. If it's fully cooked food, if you can set the oven. We usually set our oven for warm and hold. It's a setting that keeps the oven around 200 degrees or so. We usually heat up the food before Shabbos and leave it in there on warm and hold. Warm and hold holds the food warm for about 3 hours. You can do that, or you can leave your oven on regular setting, which will shut off after 12 hours. But warm and hold's only 3. Recommend 3 versus 12. Save energy. Good idea. Not a halakhic idea, just a good idea. So with that, you can put the food in the oven that you're going to use for your meal. You have 2 options. Option number 1 is put the food in there that you're only going to take it all out at one time, close the oven, and walk away. Because whatever you do after you close the oven, if the fire goes on or not, you don't care, you don't need it. And so there's a halakhic principle of secret of basically that you have a direct consequent that's unusable, unrelated, but there's also the possibility that it's only a grumma in this case, that it's not even an immediate direct consequent of your action. It's only a possible consequent, which is better than a direct consequent. Anyway, these are all wonderful terms. We can discuss this some other time. As long as you're not actively lighting fires with your hands, not going like that to light a fire, or actively turning on the oven to light the fire, your action for closing the oven back up and fire if it were to fire back up, hypothetically, is not your problem. You're not actually lighting a fire on Shabbos. So that's one way to do it. The other way, so you open it up, you take everything out, and you close it up, and if it goes on, it goes off. It's not your problem because it's acting on its own volition, having nothing to do with you. The other thing to do is if you need to have multiple servings of food. Let's say you want to have a fish course and a meat course, whatever it is, right? So, but you wrap your fish up in your oven so that your fish is not exposed to your meat. So you wrap your fish up, you wrap the meat up so that they're not, we don't put fish flavors and meat flavors together in an oven, which will be a class for another time when we talk about kosher. But let's say you want to do that, and if you want to take, let's say, the fish out first, but leave the meat part of the meal in the oven to stay warm while you serve the fish. What you can do is leave a pot holder inside of the oven at the edge of it to hold it open. That allows the air to continue to cycle through it without leaving the door fully open. So, or you can leave the door fully open if you really want to, but it's probably better not to do that because you don't walk into it or have all the heat rolling up to your house immediately. But as long as you leave some of it open where it doesn't close and reactivate the thermostat, that's okay. So those are your two options. Either take everything out in one shot, close it, walk away, never talk to it again. Or if you want to take things out on a couple of occasions, don't let it close all the way. Put an oven mitt inside of it to allow the air to continue to circulate, and don't turn on the thermostat. Okay? So that's with food that's fully cooked. Now, let's say you only have food that's partially cooked. Okay? If the food is partially cooked or totally raw, partially cooked meaning it's more than Michael Bender's side. It's more than a third or more than a half cooked. Okay? Or it's totally raw. You cannot open and close the oven door at all until you're ready to take it out. So you basically have to leave it in there and walk away and come back when it's ready to come out. Okay? The opening and closing is going to be a problem. So that's why you want to have it in a situation where it's pretty much ready to be served, because once you open the door and you take it out, you're going to take it out, and that's it. So you have to have it in a state where it's fairly ready to eat, just in case you mess up. You're not going to say, ooh, we have to put it back in there. Not done. As long as it's mostly done, you won't feel the urge to leave it back in there and close it back up, which is basically pretty much what the rabbis had in mind originally, that if it's fairly edible, you leave it continuing to cook, you're most likely not going to want to reactivate or restart the cooking process or continue the cooking process. For Sephardim, this wouldn't work, because for Sephardim, as long as you could somehow improve more cooking, they would have a problem with you doing this. But for Ashkenazim, they do not have this problem. Are the less flammable inputs to keep the oven open? Yeah, if you use some type of mylar, but it won't. Usually, your oven won't be that hot. You should probably not have it set for more than 200, 250 degrees to keep stuff hot for a long time. So for the most part, it won't be that flammable. But you can definitely use, for the most part, most of your pot holders should be flame retardant and heat resistant. They won't melt or catch on fire, especially because where you're going to put them is going to be at the edge of the oven door, which is not as intensely hot as the inside of the actual oven itself. But yeah, you definitely have options. Silicone silicone mitts that you could use as well to hold the door open. But that was the question: are there any other options besides your oven mitts that are just sort of standard cotton and polyester? And yeah, you have silicone mitts, and you have something made out of mylar or something along those lines that are much more heat resistant. And so with the oven, if it's partially cooked, you basically put it in there before Shabbos, get it rolling, and then either that night, come back from shul, or the next day, you come, you open it, you take it out, and the world's a better place. The other one is putting it in there totally raw. So let's say you want to make, I don't know, slow roast a brisket overnight for like 12 hours, which is always a good idea. What you do is you just put it in there raw, and you leave it in there at a low temp, cook it overnight, and it'll come out just fine. Just one of those covered long cooked briskets, or short ribs are another big example of that.
Should you put the brisket in there, let's say Thursday night before Shabbos?
Why Thursday night? We'll be in there for like 48 hours then.
Oh, okay. So that's right.
Yeah. Even there's a process of smoking meat, which takes 24 hours. That is, maybe I'll touch on it here in just a second. But that is possible to do, which is on a really low temperature smoke, which it takes 24 hours and it blackens and the whole process. It's really quite awesome. It's quite an awesome process, but it requires a certain type of. You can't really do it in your regular oven. You need a smoker and a certain type of wood and fire and anyway. It's complicated, possible but complicated. Okay, so any questions on ovens? Stoves.
Can you put a timer on the oven? So you said the timer runs like 40 minutes, and in the middle of Shabbat, the timer.
So that's what warm and hold will do. It'll set it for like 3 hours, which is actually fine because that'll take you you'll put that on like before candle lighting, and it'll stay warm basically until after your meal. 3 hours is about how much time you would need. But yeah, you can leave it on a timer from before Shabbat, take it out, and have it shut off. And you can do it with a crock pot too. Have your crock pot set on a timer, have it shut off, let's say like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon after or 1 o'clock, whenever you're going to have the food ready to take it out. But you can only have it shut off the oven or the crock pot, but not turn on to cook something on Shabbos. Only to shut off. Okay, everyone got that? The question was, what can I have a timer shut off my oven? The answer is yes, but only to shut it off, not to activate it on Shabbos. Only to shut it off. Okay? All right, so we've talked about stoves, we talked about ovens, and now we're going to talk about roasting and barbecuing to be completed before Shabbos. This is section 3. Roasting and barbecuing have to be completed before Shabbos because it cooks it so fast. Okay? All right, so roasting meat has to be done before Shabbos. Now, it's entirely possible, especially if we're talking about smoking things, that if you were to go ahead and, a question about the previous thing. The timer can turn the oven off, but you cannot continue to use the top of the stove. Okay, I don't understand your question. Yeah, you can have a timer turn anything off, as long as it's not turning it back on. You can continue to use the top of the stove. Are you asking about taking stuff out of the oven and putting it onto the stove on the blech? Is that the question?
It just sounded like when you were talking about the timer shutting the oven off, maybe I just didn't hear the middle part, and I heard you couldn't use the top of the stove, so maybe it was just a lack of bandwidth. I don't know. But now you said that it just can't turn it back on and then start something else. So I get it.
Okay. So all I was trying to say is that the timer can turn the thing off. It can't turn it off on Shabbos, but it can't turn anything on Shabbos.
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically it.
And then as a sidebar, is that like any electronic?
Yeah, like you can set your AC to, your AC you can actually set as a thermostat to go on and off. It's only in regard to cooking that it has to shut off but not turn on to cook something. But lights can go on and off, AC can go on and off, but only in regards to cooking it only goes off but not on.
Okay.
So you couldn't, like, let's say, leave something raw. You couldn't, leave hamburger raw on an electric grill before Shabbos, set it on the timer, right, to go off, 20 minutes before your meal starts, and then, cook your burger and then shut off afterwards. You couldn't do that, okay? Because you're not allowed to set something. You're not allowed to set something to go off on Shabbos. When we talk about I won't be in this class. There's a much more complex law of Shabbos called Amira La'akum, which is you're not allowed to ask non-Jewish people to do labor for you on Shabbos. because that would defeat the purpose. You'd be like, I can't cook anything. That's okay. I'll spend it on a Jewish neighbor to cook something for me. So basically, there's an enactment against doing that, and using a timer falls under that same category. Okay, so let's go back to roasting and barbecuing. I'll start it over again. Roasting and barbecuing has to be done before Shabbos. You're going to have hot coals. It cooks really fast. Got to be done before Shabbos. Also, a lot of the rules that I'm mentioning about half cooked and 1/3 cooked will apply to things that take a long time to cook. But things that cook really fast, like steamed vegetables, you can't leave them raw. You have to fully cook them before Shabbos. You can't just rely on them being raw ahead of time. You have to cook them. You have to cook them to as much as you want them cooked before Shabbos, and then you can leave them on the fire. But because they cook so quickly and they become tender so fast in just a few minutes, the roasting and barbecuing rule applies to them as well. And some people argue that even things like chicken cook really fast, but you can slow cook chicken nowadays. I think it's just the differences in terms of how people perceive different types of foods cooking fast or not. But as long as you're not going to handle it or touch it. But roasting and barbecuing, you couldn't, let's say, fire up the barbecue, Erev Shabbos, throw the meat on, and then walk away from it. Because basically most people walk and they check and they flip, and that's the normal way to use a barbecue. And it cooks it so fast you wouldn't take your mind off of it. Now, if you wanted to turn your barbecue into a smoker, right, and you throw ash on it, and then you put like a pot in there, then it basically becomes your old-fashioned kira. Okay, in a sense, you could use it that way, where if you cover it with ash, if you cover your barbecue with ash, and then you're sitting on top of your barbecue and you're putting it directly in there, then we're talking about your ancient kira, your ancient cooktop, and you could leave something to smoke in there for a long time. So if you really felt the need to make your beer can chicken, something like that, for Shabbos and anything like that, you have to throw ash on top of the coals to mute them a little bit before leaving it and having it cook for a very long time before Shabbos. Okay, but that's all I'm going to say about that. So basically just know that you can't leave something roasting or barbecue before Shabbos because it cooks too fast. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a second. We're going to go over all these things one more time when we talk about the next section here. This is B3, blech, water blech, and plata. Disputes about how they may be used. Okay, so let's go over the three types of apparatus over here real quick. Okay, the blech. Blech is a Yiddish word that means tin. All right, it means that flat piece of metal. Okay, I'm going to tell you what, in case you don't want to spend the money for the other things yet, you can always use this, or if you're stuck somewhere, it's always important you kind of know how to use it. A regular blech is kind of boring, so you can only leave stuff. Let's set it up in ABC. Okay, there's an area in the upper right-hand corner. Just visualize with me for a second. In the upper right-hand corner, where the fire is on this piece of tin. Underneath there is a fire, and usually you'll see on your blech this little ring looks like it's been heated by a fire. It's because it's been heated by a fire. So imagine that the fire is roaring underneath there. That section immediately around that little ring of fire in that quadrant is section A. That's called section A is directly over the fire. Right next to that spot is a section called B, which is next to the fire. Then basically beyond that, the other three quadrants are section C, which is where the blech is warm because it's metal connected to a part of the metal that's touching the fire, but it's not so hot. So, like, you probably even leave your hands on it and probably not even get hot in some sections of it, depending on how high the fire is underneath the upper right-hand quadrant. The point of the blech is to affect your garf and your katum that we talked about already, the covered fire. Okay? So just to go over that one more time, the rabbis were concerned that people would adjust the fire and stir their pots if they left their fire rolling as it were during the rest of the week. So they required a pot that was not fully cooked to be placed upon a fire that had been muted slightly, so that way it would require them to not touch the pot to help it cook much faster. They already reminded themselves not to adjust it. Some people have the opinion that the blech, that having a proper blech means to take this tin over the fire. It also means to cover the knobs with aluminum foil. That way you remind yourself not to adjust the fire. That's a common custom that a lot of people do. If you don't remember to do it, that's okay. That's not my custom. I know other people's custom is to take aluminum foil to cover the knobs, or alternatively, just take the knobs off so you don't come to adjust the fire on Shabbos. I'm just going to touch on the use of this blech very, very quickly. If you have your fully cooked soup, you can leave it in the upper right-hand quadrant A, and if you can move it between A and B interchangeably all day long. If you're going to serve out of the pot on the blech, pull it from A to B and serve out of it, because you're not allowed to stir the pot while it's on top of the fire. And then if you have other foods that you would like to warm, you can put them on C, because in section C they're never really going to get hot. But you can't take anything and put them either on C or B, and definitely not A, unless you meet the terms of Chazarah, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for the most part, it's actually the most annoying blech to use because it has the least amount of versatility on Shabbos. Okay, yes?
Can you repeat what you said about last class? If you have soup and you have more guests come over and you need more soup, you can add it, but you can't, if you add it to the fire, but you can't.
Okay. It was only for, I think it was only for solid foods. I don't think I said it for liquid foods. Did I talk about liquid foods? For soup. What was I talking about? Remind me. I was talking about adding more matzo balls to the soup. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So you would have to pull it to section B in that case and add the matzo balls to the soup, and then you can put them back over A because you won't cook them again. Yeah. But you can't do anything while it's on top of A. A is like the demilitarized zone. You can't do anything there. Right. All activity has to take place away from A. Okay.
So what's the use of A?
A is to keep it over the fire. A is the fire. B is next to the fire. C is away from the fire. And so you can leave your soup pot on A. Okay. And if you're going to serve, you pull it to B. But B is still hot and close to the fire. Does that make sense?
So C is where you need to serve it from.
B you can serve the soup from B because not directly. It's right next to the fire, still hot. Not directly over the fire, but still hot from the fire. Like something can get hot in that spot. Okay?
So you cannot serve from A.
Right. Cannot serve from A. Okay? Cannot serve from A. Okay? Can't serve, can't stir, nothing. You preferably should not. Technically.
Why? I didn't understand.
That was we talked about last week about stirring the soup while still cooking. We talked about there was dispute amongst the rabbis because when you stir it, you move different temperature areas from one part of the pot to another. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And so therefore, we just recommend taking it off. It's not the worst thing in the world, but just to keep some opinions happy, we take it off of the fire. And in this case, the way it's going to look is you're going to slide it from A to B. Okay. And so that's what it's going to. That's what you want it to be.
And nothing can leave C to go to A or B.
Say that one more time.
Anything that you pull from A or B to C cannot go back to A or B.
Unless you meet the
terms. Is that what you were saying?
All right, which we'll go over in a second. But otherwise, you're correct. Yes. Yes. You have to meet the terms of Chazarah in order to go back on to B and A. That's exactly what we're saying. Okay. Okay. Now, if you wanted to heat something up, let's say you had a cold kugel in the fridge or something, you can only put it on C. And there are opinions who will allow you potentially to move things up to B, which we'll talk about in a second over here. When I get to the water blech. So let's move on to the water blech. I just confused you by throwing that in. Okay, so there are opinions that basically say that if any place that would take food to Yad Soletispo, we talked about that last week, where food reaches a really hot temperature, right? You're not allowed to put stuff in that spot because it's basically like putting it on top of a fire. So there's all types of discussions about what that's supposed to look like. I'm not going to take you through all that through this class. Just know that in order to use the water blech on the plata, you have to take this lenient approach that basically allows you to put the food onto onto an apparatus, either the water blech or the plata, where the food potentially could get to Yad Soletispo, which means that it's like hot to the touch. That's like it's hot, so that like if you know like if you test water, see if it's too hot for a baby, that would like scald them. That's what Yad Soletispo basically is. Like that's just too hot, which basically is around 104 degrees or so. And actually, I says every time I give this class that health code standards require that most hot water places like jacuzzis and water and other places filled with hot water not exceed 104 degrees because you can accomplish scalding in somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes, especially in smaller people or people have more sensitive skin, etc., etc., etc. So 104 degrees is really a good way to kind of look at that temperature. You can scald somebody at 120 in about 5 minutes. So just to give you an idea of what that is, 120 is when water comes out of your faucet all the way, pushed all the way to hot. Okay, 212 is boiling. Now we kind of know what temperature looks like. So 104 doesn't seem like it's hot, but it can burn you, or a small child who has or people who have sensitive skin. 104 degrees is hot. Okay, so if your food can get to that temperature, then that's Yad Soletispo, and that's a concern. Now, the water blech, the way the water blech works is that it's set up the same way as a regular blech, except it's a giant cookie sheet with a lid on top. Very important to buy only prefab water blech. Don't try to build your own unless you have a degree in engineering. That you need to allow a certain amount of pressure to escape, otherwise it can blow up on you. Okay, so just know that it's better not to build your own. Get one prefab, or have somebody with metallurgy skills to make one. It's basically a giant jelly roll pan or cookie sheet with another little metal cover on top of it, filled with boiling water. The cool thing about it is that because if you don't use a lot of heat, you can diffuse the temperature really easily because water is an excellent medium for diffusing temperature. If you didn't know that, just go live on planet Earth and you'll see that that's exactly why we can live here. Okay, so because water helps to diffuse temperature across the surface of everything. In places where there's not enough water, too much frozen water, you get the picture. But the water blech basically is you heat up water in a small pot, you boil it, you then move that pot to the side, put your giant cookie sheet, jelly roll pan down, pour the boiling water inside. I usually fill up, I think it's a 4-quart pot. Add that to the cookie sheet. Put it on a low flame, on the smallest flame, on what they call a simmer burner on my stove. Set that around like 2 or so. That way the water is not too hot that it boils out over the course of Shabbos, but just hot enough that it'll get your food warm on Shabbos. So if you set it just right, you'll make every opinion happy because your food won't ever get to Yad Soletispo. So you can heat up all kinds of food on top of this thing on Shabbos. Why? Why is it different than a regular blech? Well, because you're relying on this principle. It's called kedera al gabe kedera, the principle known as a pot on top of a pot. But if you have a pot full of food, it diffuses the temperature. It's an abnormal method of cooking food, and therefore you can use the entire surface of the water blech to heat food up. If the water blech gets to a temperature where the food you would put on it would get to a very hot temperature, some opinions would not permit you to use it. But I believe that an engineer went and tested the temperature of it, and in my use of it over the past, I guess, 15 or so years, never met food that got to such a tremendously hot temperature that it would be scalding. It was warm, pleasant to eat, and not hot to the touch necessarily. And so therefore, probably one of the easiest methods for heating stuff up. And you can use the entire surface of it because you're not actually putting anything directly on the fire. You're putting something in an abnormal fashion on the fire. And that's how you can go ahead and use the whole surface of it on Shabbos. You can't put anything liquid on it because it's entirely possible the liquid could get to Yad Soletispo from cold. And as we learned last week, that's bishul after bishul. We don't want that. Okay. The third thing over here is the plata. The plata can get to super hot temperatures. Why? Because they love making stuff super hot in Israel. And so there were many people who objected to the use of the plata. The plata actually has a lot of positives to it. It doesn't need a separate blech on it because there's no thermostat to adjust. There's no knobs to turn. Many other, especially electric hot plate. Regular electric hot plates tend to have thermostat on them, an adjustable heat thermostat, which there could be a concern of adjusting. Plata, you just plug it in and you roll. The common custom is not to use anything on it. This is based on the decision of Rabbi Avaji Yosef, Allah Shalom. He passed away several years ago. Very big, important Sephardi posek, the chief rabbi of Israel. All around awesome dude. And he basically permitted the use of the plata outright. You could take you could leave your soup on it, not put it on Shabbos. You could take your cold food out of the refrigerator and put it on the plata. All really good, nice stuff. I think even in the Art Scroll book by Rabbi Simcha Ben Cohen, I think he also seems to imply that use of a hot plate or a plata like this is also permitted. He should take the lenient approach, which he seems to take that lenient approach, which is not shared by the full gamut of other Ashkenazi decisors, but the common practice seems to be that people use a plata without any other problems. If you're somebody who wants to be super stringent, you can put other food on the plata and then put other food on top of that food that's on the plata, so it makes it look like a water blech or a kedera, gabi kedera. Or we can be slightly more strict and do what some people do that I've seen, which is invert aluminum pans, so that way it's not so hot. Some people just just out of practicality, because of how hot the plata gets, they use ceramic tile in between the food and the plata, because the plata gets really hot and they need to diffuse the temperature anyway. No matter how you slice it, you can go ahead and use a plata on Shabbos. So the common practice again is to go ahead and put any type of dry food on top of the plata at any time, without worrying about it. The exception would be you can't put liquid on there, or any food that was previously cooked. Like you can't take a plate of matzo balls and eat them on the plata necessarily. Some people have told me that if you mute the heat a little bit, like if you take like your falafel balls or matzo balls and heat them on the plata where it's really hot. As long as you keep the heat down, so that way they for sure won't roast on top of the plata. You can heat them up on it. On the water blech, it's unlikely that they'll get hot enough that it will cook them again. But other than that, you can go ahead and put any food you want to on them as long as there's no liquid in them. Okay, any questions on that? Those are really like Chazarah and Hatmanah type things. But with the Shehiyah, any other questions about just leaving food on a plata or a blech?
So you cannot leave it as soup?
You can leave soup on the plata.
So it's a liquid?
But you can leave it before Shabbos, just like with anything else. You just can't put it on there on Shabbat. Before Shabbat, you could. You just don't need a separate blech. Let me clarify that. So with the water blech and the plata, okay, you just can't take it. You just can't put liquid on them on Shabbat. But before Shabbat, you can put it on there, and you can use the whole surface of either the water blech or the plata. Okay, the regular blech is the one that has all these other extra rules about it. But the plata and the water blech, you can use the whole thing. Again, some people might tell you yes or no. I'm telling you the common custom is to go ahead and use the whole surface of either the water blech or the plata. Just know that platas get a lot hotter than water blechs, and so you might have a problem heating up pre-cooked things like a matzo ball or something like that. But other than that, the water blech and the plata are much preferable because you don't need a separate covering on them. You just put food right on top of it and call it a day. If you want to leave soup to heat up from before Shabbos onto Shabbos, you would heat it up on your stove and then transfer it to your plata to keep it warm. Okay? I should have said that before. Didn't clarify that. Yeah. I don't have a plata. I don't. I have a water blech, which is basically a jelly roll pan. But
that's the thing that you sent us.
Yeah.
Husband?
Yeah, that was a water blech one. But if anyone wants to come look at mine, I'll show you guys afterwards. Afterwards, I can carry my computer into my kitchen and we can have a look at the water blech afterwards. Okay, moving right along over here. Oh, it's getting late. All right, let's see if I can wrap this up. Oh, I'm not gonna get the rest. Usually I'm so good. It took a whole course on learning how to get these things through real fast. Okay. Okay, let's see. We can get through the rest of this stuff pretty fast. Sorry, kind of late. They were doing on time. Okay. All right, let's go to C. Chazarah, putting cooked food back on the fire. Okay, and what does back on the fire mean? Okay, so that means that you had it on your blech, okay, on section A. It also means that you had it on your water blech or on your plata if it's a liquid, okay? If it's a solid, you're not going to have these problems for your water blech and your plata, as we just described, but on a regular blech, you'll have this problem, okay? So if there's no blech available, okay, then you can't put anything back on the fire. You have to have a blech. Okay, Chazarah is not possible without a blech. Chazarah requires you to have garf and katum. Again, back to the original Chazarah, you have to have it either scraped or covered, and because Chazarah basically meant Chazarah looked a lot more like cooking. You would kind of take it, check it out, put it back to cook it for longer. And so those are some of the issues. Now, how cooked does it have to be to return it back to the pot? So if it's before Shabbos, you have to be able to return it so that way it could get to a rolling boil before Shabbos. If it's liquid, and if it's on Shabbos, Sfardim, it has to also remain hot above Yad Soledesbo. Ashkenazim technically would require that, but they have a lot more leniencies. So technically speaking, to do Chazarah, to return the food back to the fire, let's say you take it off on Shabbos, okay, and you want to serve and then put it back on the fire, well, you have to, number one, take it in your hands. Both the Ashkenazim and Sfardim agree to these conditions. They take the food from off of the fire, you have the intent to put it back on the fire, you're going to hold it in your hands, or at least one hand, you're going to put it down somewhere on a trivet or something like that with one hand on it, and you can serve with the other one. And then you can ladle out food into your bowls or to your other bowl or pour it into another bowl. And then you have to take your hot food and put it back on the fire. That is preferably the way to do it. If you messed up any one of these conditions, so let's say you didn't have the intent to put it back on the fire, if you put it like on the table or on the floor, or or you forgot about it, you walked away, and you came back to it. So for Sfardim, if you missed any of those conditions, if you miss any of those conditions, you can't put it back on the fire at all. For Ashkenazim, even if you put it on the floor and all that other stuff, as long as the food is still warm enough that you wouldn't be embarrassed to eat it yourself, like it doesn't feel like cold, right? I would say it's like less than 104 degrees. It's kind of like, especially with hot soup. Hot soup usually is served around 180 or so. So if it gets down to, let's say, where it's like feels like a warm cup of tea, like let's say like it feels like a cup of tea that's been sitting out for about 5, 6, 7 minutes, or it doesn't burn you, just sort of feels somewhat warm that you would still serve it to somebody. That you can put that back on the fire, because for Ashkenazim, they're a little bit more lenient on bishul achar bishul. As long as it was still somewhat hot that you would still serve it, you can always put it back on the flame, even if you forget all the other conditions. But meet all the other conditions. Have it in mind to put it back on the fire when you take it off. Keep a hand on it while you serve out of it or pour the food into a serving dish. And don't put it, put it down on a table or a place while still holding it in one hand. Okay, and don't forget about it. Okay, so everybody requires that. That food all has to be fully cooked in order for it to go back on the fire. Even on Erev Shabbat, it doesn't have to be fully cooked, but it has to be able to get back to boiling again. So interestingly enough, it's one of the only times when you have this quote-unquote issue of having food remaining, of taking it off and putting it back on. As long as you were just to put it there and walk away from it, you wouldn't have this make sure it gets the boiling problem. But if you're messing with the food a lot before Shabbos, you have to make sure it gets back to boiling. An application of this, going to number 3 over here, is when you put hot water in your urn, you should make sure that it boils before Shabbos and pump it out one time to make sure that all the water in the system is all up to boiling. Okay, that's one application of that. Another is that basically, if you have soup, you should try to get it to boiling before putting it on the plata before Shabbos, because often the soup will be fully cooked before Shabbos. Make sure it's still boiling when going into Shabbos before putting it on the plata. And then cool off as long as it's reached boiling ahead of time. For during Shabbos, so we talked about the fact that it has to be somewhat hot to serve to people, and basically that means, like, if you serve chalent to everybody, or if you serve soup to everybody, anything along those lines, you can serve it out and then put it back onto the fire to keep it warm. Okay, so Chazarah is really pretty simple. It's not at all the same as taking food out of the fridge and putting it on your plata. Here we're talking specifically about liquids. For taking food out of the fridge, you have to put it in a situation where it's not going to be heated over a regular heat source. Here, Chazarah is actually talking about being heated on top of a fire. Okay? Any questions about that? Let's see. Here's a question. Related to Svardim, what if there was an accident, for example, something spills, and your reaction is to catch it and breaking contact from the pot? I'm not sure what actual practice is for Svardim in that situation. I think as long as the pot is still above Yad Soledes, I mean it's still really hot, then even if you break contact with it for a second, as long as you don't step away from it, you may still be able to put it back on. Whereas Ashkenazim are even more lenient than that it could even be below Yad Soledes, as long as it's still be warm enough to serve it. But for Svardim, I'm not 100% sure about that. I think not. I think you would be stuck in that situation. Okay, so that's it for Chazarah. Chazarah basically is putting it back on the fire, meeting all those conditions. Okay, that's pretty much it for that. All right, let's blow through the rest of these over here. Let's skip. We can go through D and E. We'll just skip F. Demo. Whoever wants to take on can watch that. But let's go through D and E really quick. D and E are really kind of cool. Okay, warming not using a conventional heat source. Okay, solar oven. You can use a solar oven because it's not a problem. Again, of having food insulated. Basically, it's just a giant hot box that's left out in the sun. It uses whatever moisture is in the air, traps sunlight. You can heat food up in that. Since it doesn't directly touch the pot itself, it's not insulating, which we talked about last week being a problem. And so a solar oven would be a fun and interesting way to heat up food for Shabbat, on Shabbat, because it's just trapping heat. It's like leaving like food in your car, right? That's basically the best example of a solar oven. Air can't escape, heat gets trapped, takes a long time to escape. Nice, easy way to heat something up. You can also heat food up near a flame or a radiator. So if it's winter and you want to heat up, some food, because you had a fire going from before Shabbos, that you could do. Which, by the way, means that if you want to start a fire before Shabbos, you have to have the majority of your logs catch fire to have a fire keep rolling for Shabbos. That way you don't go and stoke the fire on Shabbos. And then if you wanted to put food near that to get warm, you could do that. If you still have radiant heat, you wanted to put food on a radiator to heat up, you could do that because it's abnormal. Number 3 over here, you can leave food in the sun to heat up. And in Israel, people have solar water heaters. Solar water heater has to be specifically just solar water heating, and it has to be solar heated water, not solar electric water. Those are two different apparatus. Solar electric is hugely inefficient. I don't know why anybody would do that. If they did, still can use it on Shabbos because they're using electricity from a solar panel. But solar water heaters are heated through one of two different methods. They're basically either totally mechanical and passive heat retention. One is to basically you basically put your water is pressurized to the roof of the house and goes into a tank and is heated there by the sun and is intensified by painting it black and so on and so forth. Another method that has been done is to take food grade antifreeze. I'm blanking on the name on the scientific name of antifreeze is called propylene glycol. Thank you. I was going to get that. Thank you very much. Whoever told me that was me. Propylene glycol, which stores heat, and you can it transfers it. It's basically a regular osmotic transfer. I think it's osmotic transfer of heat. Propylene glycol is heated on the roof of the house. It goes into your house and swirls around your water tank inside of your house. Since it's a totally passive heat transfer experience, there's no fire involved, and there's no electricity involved. It's that water can also be used and heated on Shabbos. So you can heat stuff on top of that on Shabbos because it's basically like leaving it out in the sun, heating it in warm propylene glycol. There's an exception to this using number 4, using a lens to intensify sunlight. You can't heat up food using a lens like a magnifying glass. Also, someone asked me about the Felsner lens that used to be on projection TVs. There was on certain types of TVs, which is no longer used because it's all LCD now. But if, let's say you got an old projection TV and you took the screen off and you held it up to cook your food, it can get really super hot. You can like cook food in that lens. There's a Sefer Birkai Yosef in the 19th century who addressed it. He said basically you could start a fire with that. It's not any different than using friction to start fire. Starting a fire using a lens or friction or whatever it is to start a fire, starting a fire. And so therefore to cook in this thing basically requires you to start a fire. And intensifying it means that you're simply harnessing the energy of the sun to create fire. And therefore he says it's probably a Torah level prohibition since you're basically starting a fire. So that wouldn't work. But leave it out in the sun without having any lens to super intensify it to basically turn into a laser fire type apparatus would be fine. So your solar oven would be okay, but if your solar oven had a magnifying lens on it, you're not going to want to use that. Any questions about warming food in the sun? Anything about that? I'll wrap it up real quick over here. Okay. Last one over here is Hatmanah. We talked about this a little bit last time. I just want to sort of wrap it up a little bit, with what you can't wrap up. Hatmanah and E over here is insulating food. Things that are mosif havel, things that intensify heat, are things that will cover every side of your pot and pan. So it'll be the sides and the top. So we talked about something like that last week, where if it intensifies the heat, you can't use that even before Shabbos. And so that's something you can't use even before Shabbos. Hold it into Shabbos. Level 2 is Eino Mosif Havel, which is that it has gradual heat loss. Number 2, number 2 over here. The sides of the cover are exposed. Excuse me. And those be things like a blanket or a towel and such. Those could be used before Shabbos to cover it up. However, things that are Eino Mosif Havel, like a blanket, things that are not really super good at storing heat. They're not mylar and they're not insulation materials. They still can't be made on Shabbos to cover the top and the sides. Someone pointed out that people used to make for their hot water urn this little sock thing. Basically had a top and went down. Basically, it was a cover, a cylinder, fit perfectly over those old-fashioned water urns. And they'd write Shabbat across the top of it, and he'd say, "What's that for?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's my Shabbat water urn cover." And he's like, "Well, don't you know that you can't leave it on there because you're covering your hot water urn?" "Oh, but just for Shabbos." The whole point is that you're not allowed to cover anything on the top and all sides for Shabbos. Even though they've seen those things for sale, don't buy them because they won't serve the purpose either. You can't really use them on Shabbos anyway. So the proper way to cover stuff up to keep them a little bit warmer, like on a platter or blech, this is section E, you want to use a towel or a blanket that doesn't touch the sides of the pot. So drape it over the top of your pots and pans in a method that won't catch your blanket or your towel on fire is the best way to do it. So you don't want to wrap it around the sides of the pot, but to put it over the top to kind of keep the warm air down is perfectly fine. Any questions on that? I didn't touch on crock pots at all. I think we talked about crock pots last week. Did anyone want to talk about crock pots, or are we pretty much saturated with information for the evening?
In regards to covering the insulating, are you saying whatever food that we are heating by whichever apparatus we're using, we're not allowed to cover them at all?
You can cover them over the top with a blanket, but not, or with a towel, but not the sides. So you can cover the top, or you can cover the sides, but not the top and the sides.
So we can use the matching tops to them.
Oh, we're talking about no, we're not talking about the lid. We're talking about covering the lid with an additional blanket, towel, or something like that. Okay.
Okay.
So like you couldn't use a Mylar blanket on Shabbos because it's a Mosif hevel. Mylar, something that retains heat, you know, and so you couldn't use that. I don't know who has this stuff lying around except maybe somebody like me, but I don't have one of those lying around. But you can use a towel or a blanket because those things don't tend to trap heat and intensify it in the same way. Okay. I'll say one thing: crock pot is not a problem. Hatmanah is not a problem. Insulation because the top is uncovered. And so therefore, if you wanted to take stuff out and put it back in, you could do that. I'll say one of the things that if you want to take stuff, if you want to take the crock pot out and put it back into the crock pot to save chunk for later on Shabbos, you just need to make a blech on that, which basically means just covering your knob on your crock pot. That's all I'm going to say about crock pots. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast here.